So we're going to take a look now in the Yalkut Bi'urim on page Ayin Hey. Now, let's keep in mind, just to review, that here on Daf Tes Amud Beis, we had the question of Levi. And Levi's problem was that instead of 15 arayos, we should add a 16th erva, and that would be what's called imo, that's anusas aviv. And that should have been included in our Mishnah. But there's something very strange, because the Gemara tries to defend the fact that the Mishnah would not have included in the category of Shtei Achios, the case of Bito, because the Onsim lo kamayri, lo mishkan. You remember that? That was the last line of yesterday's shir, that the Mishnah is not interested in addressing cases of onus. So the Maharsha says, if the Mishnah, as the Gemara establishes, is not interested in onsim, then what was Levi's problem? Levi, in front of Rebbe, said, why didn't the Mishnah mention imo anusas aviv? Well, the answer is simple. Bi'anusim, bi'onsim lo kamayri. The Mishnah is not interested in onsim. Now, I'm not sure whether to skip the next part of this paragraph, the balance of this paragraph, because it's very complicated. I don't even know who wrote this sefer called the Nahar Shraddha. Maybe somebody could Google it, or you could look it up in Beis Hakit Sfarim. But let's give it a shot, because very often what I find is that when I learn by myself, I can't figure it out. But when I learn with others, Ochav Ruso Mesusa. He says the following. If you have a very specific din in the Mishnah, then even if the hechatimtza, the scenario, depends upon a very strange sequence of events, namely onus, the Mishnah would not hesitate to record such a case. Af im lo yitzur el ba'onus. Why? Because that's a case of a din misuya. And the reason for that is, she'im lo tetived nuchal lovely day tos, v'u'svash din zelonet mishum chalim v'demes and halacha came. By omitting a din misuyam, the reader, the student, could come to the mistaken conclusion that the din is not like that. And that's why the Mishnah omitted it. So let's take a look now at the Shtei Achios situation, which the Gemara says was omitted in the case of Bito, because it's the Ones lo Shchia. Ela b'din ervas Bito b'Shtei Achios, af im lo yichtov, ein hadavar olu lovo lidei tos. Okay, so here's the punchline. In other words, the goal line. What we have to get to is to understand that even in the absence of Shtei Achios, no mistake would be shayach. People would not come to the wrong conclusion, as opposed to a din misuyim like imo anusas aviv, which Levi insists should have been included in the Mishnah, because otherwise you're playing a very dangerous game, taking a risk that the reader will mistakenly think that the law is not like that. And there would be yibum in anusas aviv. And in fact, there is a shita in Tanoim that anusas aviv is muteres. And we would think that the Mishnah is accepting that shita by virtue of the fact that the Mishnah omitted mentioning it and listing in the enumeration of 15 arayos. But in the case of Shtei Achios, there's no fear. Olul means a fear of a possibility of tos. Why? Mishum she'ein shum siba lomar shelo yiskayim bozeh haklal asur lezeh v'teres asur lezeh v'teres lezeh. Shari etzem tur bito mi yibum mefurash b'masnisa. But the Mishnah says explicitly that Bito is out of the league of Yibum. And what difference to make whether it's Bito or Bito Anusaso? And if it's Bito Anusaso, so he raped the mother of this girl, she's still his daughter, and that's clear. No one would doubt that. And the erev of Bito there applies. And if now her sister, through another brother, falls for Yibum, then the other sister will be V'siabemes because it's not a Chosik Hukaso, insofar as Bito is an erev that prevents the Zika from being Chal. But no one would mistakenly think that in the case of Bito Me'anusaso, she's not Bito. And if she is Bito, the Mishnah says explicitly that Bito is not Zkuka L'Yibum. But now we get to Imo Anusas Ovid. Here, there's a claim that there's a very great risk of a mistake. Why? Havo imlo yitov tur bi imo anusas aviv. See, here we're not talking about a biological error. In the case of Bito, it's a biological error. What difference to make if he was married to a mother or he was not married to a mother? He is the father of this girl. You know, you can take a DNA test. I mean, there's no question about it. But now we're talking about anusas aviv. We're not talking about a woman who is married to his father. Im lo yichav tur bi imo anusas aviv nisbar shemei'eza siba shehi eini poteres es sarasa biyibum v'chalitza. So let's see if, again, I did not get a chance to look at the footnote. Maybe he'll add something. Am I reading the right footnote? Just 1 second. That's a hey, right? Oh, you don't have this? Ayin hey? No, that's where we run out of tone with. We do have hey, ayin hey? So we're looking at footnote number hey.
There are 2 hays.
Oh, there are 2 hays. Oh, so I jumped to the wrong hay. Excellent. Hey, but we're in the first hay. Okay. So he doesn't really address this. 1 second. I thought just occurred to me. I think I have something. Wait a minute. Can I bounce something off you, gentlemen? You'd be my, jury. Here's what I want to say. Maybe this is what the Nahar Shraga, the light of the candle, is shining. In the discussion about Shtei Achios, all we have to answer is one question. Is there a Zikas Yibum to the other sister, making this one, let's say if we're talking about Shimon, what is the status of Rachel? Leah is clearly an erva to Shimon, Bito Me'anu Sasa. Right? Shimon had a rape situation with Sarah, and Leah was born. Therefore, there's no Zikas Yibum to Leah. Leah is Shimon's daughter. If there's no Zikas Yibum, then again the principle of Shtei Achios kicks in, and therefore he can be Miyaben Rachel, who comes through the rape situation of Reuben. That's fine. No one would make a mistake about that because again, we're just trying to fit it into the structure of Shtei Achios, which means that once there's no Zikas Yibum to one of the 2 daughters, to 2 sisters, meaning to Leah, Mimela, the path is clear for Yibum to Rachel. But our Mishnah, that's already a little different discussion. Our Mishnah is not focused on Shtei Achios. The Shtei Achios Mishnah is later on in Daf Chav. Our Mishnah is focused on Saras Erva, which itself is a gigantic chiddush, The tzara herself is not an erva, or raya, if it was a tzara outside the framework of Yibum, he's allowed to marry her. And the Torah is being mechadesh that the erva knocks off the tzaras erva, a kind of contagion. Here, the rules of the game are unclear. So even if he has a case of emo, but it's emo anusas aviv, perhaps that erva is one notch lower than the real McCoy classic erva of emo. And the nafkamina is that it doesn't pater up the tzara. So since the entire thrust of the Mishnah is kulo chiddush, namely that the tzaros of these 15 arayos are excluded from Yibum, I need the Mishnah to spell out every one of those arayos that pater up the tzara. Because the whole business, the whole enterprise, litzar, is a chiddush. Why shouldn't there be Yibum to the tzaras erva? And now I have to know exactly each case of erva should be enumerated. Why did the Mishnah, says Levi, omit anusas aviv? As far as the P'tur Tzara is concerned. What do you say? I mean, possibly. And therefore he says, I will imlo yichtov p'tur be'imo anusas aviv nisbar sheme'ezes siba, which I say it's a little bit of a different erva, and he poteres es tzaras. Oh, it fits into the language. Because the p'tur of tzara already, that's not a matter of logical classification. You know, you want to talk about achios and whether there is or is not a status of the zkuka of achos kukaso. Those are logical classifications. I want to know if Leah is an erva and there's no zikas even, or she's not an erva. So what difference does it make whether it's bito this way or bito that way? But if you're talking about knocking off the tzara, that's already kulo chidush. That I would have added. You see, those are the two words I would add to the text. That's I don't know if he would okay that. That's kulo chidush. And therefore meizes siba chehi any poteres es tzaras miu davar sheini yochel is kaim bo kol ma shenomer b'mishnah kagon sota sheina b'tzaras tzara lo nishna b'mishnah klal. Okay, so that's already a sugya that we didn't get up to of tzaras tzara. Okay, now we get to a very, very niche part of Tosfos. The Gemara says, "Beplukta lo kamayim." Picture with Tosfos. Again, it's Rebbe who responds to Levi's objection as to why Anusas Aviv, Imo Anusas, was omitted from a Mishnah, and Rebbe saying that Beplukta lo kamayim. That's Rebbe Shita. Levi Shita is that B'pluktum Kamayr. Frektosis, Im, I add the word Lil Levi. Mishnah Seinu Medaberes Gam B'dvar Mashnuyim B'machlokes. Lama lo monza erves eishis ish. Sha'af hi yesh lo liftar es tzarasa min ha'chalitza u'min ha'yiva. And this depends upon the Shita Rabbi Eliezer in Masechet Gittin on Daf Pei Beis. Now, this is a Mishnah at the beginning of a perek, which is about Shiur. Are you familiar with that concept? Shin, Yud, Vav, Reish. And the classic case of Shiur is a man who delivers a get to his wife on the condition Areat Megudreshes Mipeni Umuteres L'chol Adam Chutz Miploni. You can marry anyone, but not him. That I won't tolerate. And that's called a Shir Beget, right? He limits the application and the implication of the get. The get implies total heter to the entire world. And he says no. this guy you can't marry. As far as he's concerned, we are still married. And you are still an Ashes Ish to me, as far as this shlub named Show. So the Mishnah records Machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Chacham Megarishes Sismasnim Arei Zeg Gitech Amana Shalot Tinasi Leplon. You will not marry so and so. The Rabbi Eliezer Arei Zeg Get. The get is valid. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer holds Yesh Shir the get. The Chacham ain't no get because the Chachamim hold Aim Shir the get. So if you make a shir in your get, it's not a get. Ivrei Rabbi Eliezer, even though again we don't pass like him, but we're holding now according to Levi that the plugto kov ma'iri. Im giresh adam es ishto amanash lo tinase leruven. The holcha v'niseis l'shimon achid. So the shear was dropped Reuven out of the picture, and she went ahead and got married to Shimon. Umeis baila below bani. Shimon dies, and she falls for Yibum to his brother Reuven. Harehi p'tura ben Yibum. According to Rabbi Eliezer, there would be no Yibum. Why? Now listen to this lumbus. Mishum she'im tisyabim lo yisbatal atnai v'yafkiu ha'geruchim v'nimtza shadayin h'chisish v'bala rishon. Wow. This is wild. If the Yibum were to be implemented, then the whole get is completely invalid. Why? Because when Shimon now is Miyabim, did I get the names right? Just 1 second. I'm sorry, I got the names wrong. Right? If Reuven would be Miyabim, Eshes Shimon, then the original Gerushin is Batal Mavutal because the Tanai was Shelo Tinase LeRuven, right? Arei Ze Gitech Abana Shelo Tinase LeRuven. I want to underline the word roommate so I know. Abana Shelo Tinase LeRuven. And now Shimon dies. She falls for Yibum to Shimon's brother Reuven. If the Yibum would be implemented, it would be realized, then Yisbatal Atnai v'Yafkiu ha'Gerish. V'nimtza shadayin h'shisishi v'bala rishon. So what erva is Chal vis-a-vis Reuven? The woman who was married to Reuven's brother, Shimon, is an erev of Ashes Ish to Reuven. Is that a Pella? What do you mean Ashes Ish? She's falling for Yibum. How can you call her Ashes Ish? The answer is she's Ashes Ish of the original Baal of this woman, her first husband. Why? Because he said that if you would go ahead with this kid and marry Reuven, that torpedoes the entire Gerish. So as far as Reuven is concerned, she's an Ashes Ish. Now Shimon has another wife, Rivka, we always call her Rivka. And Rivka, according to Rabbi Eliezer, would be excluded from Yibum. So again, according to Chachamim, the get was never chal to begin with, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says Yeshir beget, the get is chal on the condition that she doesn't marry Reuven. She went ahead now and she falls for Yibum to Reuven. If the Yibum will take place, then she's the Ashes Ish of the original husband. And therefore, if Shimon has another wife, she's a tzaras erev of an Ashes Ish. V'achar she pur b'yibum b'chum yisur Ashes Ish, yesh lo liftar afis tzaras v'yayibum. And therefore, Ashes Ish should be listed in that Mishnah if you hold b'plug the kamayr. Shari Ashes Ish erev k'kol harayos. And it's not mentioned in that Mishnah. Billy Flan. What a cash. I've been waiting like for a week for this cash. I'm busy with the diagrams and the little change of air. Okay, now he adds another law. And he says the following. The af osa, meaning Ashes ish, yesh la hakish, liachos isha, hapoteres es sarasa, minayib. Re'eit sir ayin vav. I don't remember that there's a sir. What does he mean by ayin vav? Ayin vav. Oh, that's on daf yud. And let's see what happens here. Yitzchak es Sarah. Yitzchak gets married to Sarah. Okay. The Girsha, Almanashalo Tinase Lerut. The Holcha Venise L'Shimon Achiv Shal Ruven. L'Shimon Odi Shal Rivka. I guess Rivka. May Shimon Below Bonim. V'Naflu Nashav L'Fnei Ruven L'Yibum. So both Sarah and Rivka fall for Yibum to Reuben. Right, but the problem is that Yitzchak gave Sarah, a get on the condition that she doesn't get married to Reuben. So Shimon's wife Rivka should be an Eshes, a Tzaras Erev. Ari l'shitas Rabbi Eliezer, Kivan she'im yibem Ruven es Sarah, yibatu l'mafreya ha'gerishin she'nisgarshin b'Yitzchak, v'tiya Eshes ish, imta shel seres al Ruven v'is asur, al Ruven v'isur Eshes ish, shehu b'karetz, upoteres uptura michalitza v'yomov upoteres gam es Rivka tzaras adulo nimnes ervazu b'mish. That's Tosis's. I think they made a mistake, in my humble opinion, by darkening the box at the bottom. If I could write a letter to the editor. For my eyes, it makes it very difficult to read. And I noticed that in the photocopy, it's even worse. Did you notice that? It's almost impossible to read the blackened area. And the blackened area really summarizes the whole halachic implication of the diagram. I don't know who they have on their advisory board, when they do these kinds of things. Anyway. Now let's just think. The enterprise of Sarah, as far as Tur Yibum, is derived from Achos Ish, correct? In the case of Achos Ishto, right, we have two brothers married to two sisters. And when one of them dies and he leaves his wife for Yibum to the other brother, she is the sister of his wife. Yeah? Is that correct? So that is the paradigmic case of Tzaras Erev. Now, it seems to me that the root of this erva is biological, what you call she'er basa. Namely, that my wife and my brother's wife are sisters. So the sister relationship, they could be half, but it's a biological relationship. And that generates the erva. Eshes Ish is not biological at all. And there's no relation between Yitzchak and Shimon. And there's no relationship between Shimon and Yitzchak's wife. Since she's a married woman, that's an error. But there, it's not to share bosom, but rather the issues. So the question is, if we would investigate the 15 arayos listed in our Mishnah, are they share basar, or are there at least some mention of an erev machmas issues? Think for a second. Aim chamoso. You see, in aim chamoso and all the above, there's also a biological element. Again, I may be wrong about this, but it would seem to me that every single one of the 15 arayos in that Mishnah has a biological share basar element. Eishes ish is not share basar at all. And furthermore, I would investigate another question. In the 15 arayos listed in our Mishnah, do any of them have a time limitation such that a get will remove the error? And actually, we discussed yesterday about bas ishto. If she's born after the get was given, remember that discussion? Anyway, let's see the answer to Tosfos. He actually gives two answers. L'shitas habraisa, darshina and p'tur tzaras erba me'achos isha, says Litzor, asi shapi mishum she'ein balas tnai zu, that's the yevamot in our case, doma lachos isha, ki erva al hayavam lechol davar. What does that mean, lechol davar? Bein le'isur bia, bein le'isur le'it fisas kiddush. Now, again, in a classic case of Eishes Ish, that's true. You have both A and B. Obviously, there's an Isur Bia, and secondly, you cannot be Mekadesh an Eishes Ish. Aval Zu, this Eishes, in the case of Rabbi Eliezer Shir, it's different. Why? In his name, Eina Asura Elo Liboil, but there's no eat Fisas Kiddush. Yochel hu lekach. The aimba bekach mishum bitlatna. Honestly, I don't understand. We need what's called kiddushin and mesurim l'bia. Like, for example, the Gemara says in kiddushin, if a man marries two sisters simultaneously, both of them, both are invalid, and he's not married to any of them, because it's Kiddushin Sheinim Nimsarim Rabiyah. Unless we don't pass like that, I have to look up this. Here also, it would be Kiddushin Sheinim Nimsarim Rabiyah. Because if you boil her, it's being boiled in Ishis. I don't know. Oh, he says the following: V'im hisna shaloti nasero. Let's take a different scenario. Right? We're always trying to fit in another scenario that's the kasha Tosfos into the Mishnah. So let's say he gave her a get. What name did we give him? Yeah. Anyway, so he gave her a get, and he said, that you won't be married to someone. So in that case, or we have both conditions fulfilled, and it's similar to Achos Ishto. Number one, it's an Isur Bia. And number two, there's no Tfisas Kedushin. He says, Harei Muteres Lo Lebias Znus. He's interpreting this differently. I said Amanash Lo Tinase Lo means that she's an Ashes each, as far as you're concerned. And on top of that, Lo Tinase, you would be breaking the Tanai in this get if you would marry with a chuppah and a suit. But he's learning differently, that Almanas Shalo Tinase Lo means you should not have a relationship with this Reuven within the framework of marriage. But if it's out of wedlock, that's not included in the Tanakh. Therefore, Muteres Lo Lebias Znus, and it's not similar to Achos Ishto. The Afim Hisna Bein Shelo Tinosilo, Bein Shelo Tiboilo, which would mean he's covering both grounds. There's no heter bia in biznus, and there's no tfisas kiddushin. Mikomakom eina doma lachos isha sharei achos isha asura olav mishum erev zu kvar b'shas nefila. Aval zu adayan eina eshes ish b'shas nefila. This thought actually very quickly crossed my mind, but I didn't pay any attention. Sometimes things cross your mind and you don't focus. Harei grushay l'chol adam. Elrak v'shashi v'alena yisbato gito mafreya v'toshev lios. Again, this comes back to our concept of chidush, that we're very much boxed in technically. You got to be an accountant. An accountant has to play exactly by the mathematical rules. There's no room for. So if it's derived from Achos Ishto, then it's got to be exactly similar to Achos Ishto. And Achos Ishto, she's an Arab. So the Isur Bia is right there, and it is generated immediately by the Isur Arab. But not so in the case of Shiur, of Chutz Leploni, because right now the get is Chal. Through the Bia, or the marriage to Ploni, which he said Almanas Shalo, that will generate and kick off the Isur Erva of Ashes. Also, he's not on the same page as I am. I don't want to blame you, but because I thought that a case of shear means as far as so-and-so, she is still my wife, and she's an Ashes Ish to you. He's not saying no. He's saying, Harei hi muteres l'chol adam, but if so-and-so goes ahead and has bia, then the get is going to be invalid, retroactive. So the word that we should, I think, underline here is bar b'shas nefila, those three words. Right? If you want to know whether or not a woman is an Araba to knock off the Zikas Yibum and to generate an Isra and Sarah, then you've got to focus on one critical moment. The moment in the Nefila, namely when the brother died. Is there an Erev at that moment? Is there not an Erev at that moment? In Achos Isha, the Erev is Chal immediately with the Nefila. Masha Enken, in this case of Chutz Miploni, the Erev will only take place when he's Mabatal the T'nai and marries her or has an intimate relationship. But at the time of Nefila, Tosfos insists she is muteres l'chol. She is not an erev at all. And the moment that's critical, if we're deriving this chidush from achos isha, is the moment of niflu. That is Tosfos' first answer. And there are two assumptions here that underlie this answer of Tosfos. Number one, that the Isser Erev of Eishes Isha only emerges with the Bia. And the second premise that he's operating with is that you need two requirements in order to knock off Zikas Ibum. It's got to be Isser Bia and Itvisus Kiddushin. And if a man gives a get to his wife with a t'nai that she does not get married to so-and-so, then he's referring to Nisuin and not to Kiddushin, and therefore that so-and-so could be Makadish, which I thought was problematic because of Kiddushin chain and Nisarim would be. Ov Tirtzu. Now we get to the second answer of Tosfos. Afilu im nachshivenu li'eshes ish af kodem shenivu liyavam. Right, the first premise that Tosfos' teretz is predicated upon is that she's not an Eshes Ish. She's muteres l'chol even to this guy. It's only after the bittul atay through the bia then she becomes an Eshes Ish. Let's consider an Eshes Ish even before the Be'il. Why? Because what's preventing the Yibum? Eshes Ish. Adayin ein adoma lachos ish. Shereim tisyavim lo yisbatel haget legamre v'tachso lios Eshes Ish l'chol ha'olam. Nemeli yisbatel l'mafreya af kiddushay ha'achames v'nimtza kilo hoisa Eshes ach me'olam l'fichach ena poteres esat. What are we saying here? The second teretz of Tosfos, the more conceptual, profound answer of Tosfos. He's saying that in the case of an erva, we could start with achos ishto, and then we could expand it to include any erva. And what we find is that the yibum would be a violation of an erva. That would be a bias erva. But in this case, if yibum were to take place, they were going way beyond just simply a bias erva. What we're doing is we're undermining the get, and therefore even the Kiddushin, which sets up Yibum, right? What happens here? Shimon marries a woman, he dies without children, and his wife falls to even to Reuven. In this case, if Reuven would be miyavim her, then it turns out that she was never married to Shimon. Imtisyavimyo, etc., etc., is nimtza kilo haisa Eshes achiv me'olam. In case you have to add the word l'mafreya, which is supposed to say. So if we emphasize the word l'mafreya, the original get and its t'nai was batel, and therefore l'mafreya there was no get, and therefore when Shimon married this woman, there couldn't have been Eshes or Kiddushin because he was marrying an Eshes Ish. I mean, you could ask, but the Yibum is even more detrimental, or its impact, it's the effective impact of Yibum is even greater than that of Achos Ishta. in Achos Isha, so the kiyum, so to speak, of Yibum, I don't mean there's no kiyum of Yibum, but I'm saying the kiyum of what could have been Yibum would have a limited impact. It would not undermine the framework of Yibum, meaning the issues of his brother, his late brother, which generated Yibum when he died. And the proof of the pudding would be that, let's say, if there was three brothers, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi, then if Shimon would be Miyabein, Reuben's wife, who is the sister of his wife, that would in no way undermine the Yibum of Levi to this wife, because for Levi, she's not an Erev. So we see very much that in all the Arayos, the Yibum per se does not undermine the entire framework of Ishus, which is responsible for Yibum. But I would say Kalachom. How much more so should there be? What's he's talking about the Tzara now? Does he mention the Tzara here, or? Yeah. Yeah, lefichach eino poteres es tzaros. Oh, I see. Okay, I judged. I wasn't favorable in my judgment of Tosfos. I didn't emphasize the punchline of eino poteres es tzaros. Right, we're learning from Achos Isha with Litzar that there's no Ptur Tzara, that there's a Ptur Tzara. There's no Yibum to the Tzara in the case of a Tzaras Erev. We cannot apply that to the case of Chutz, of Eishes Ish, because here the Yibum would undermine the entire structure of Yibum. And therefore, she would not pater up Hatzara. Let's just think about it. Doesn't pater up Hatzara because there's no Yibum. And if there would have been Yibum, so there would be no Yibum. Therefore, such an Arab could not pater up Hatzara. You still don't have it. I'm almost there. What kind of an erva is Eishes Ish? Kind of an erva which would completely void and nullify Yibum. It's not the case in Achos Isha. This is still very much Yibum. Even if Shimon were to, quote unquote, be miyalim this woman, there's still Yibum to the other brother. Because the Yibam is not an erva to the other brother. Here, in Eishes Ish, the Yibam would mean that there was no framework of Yibam, no Ishus at all. So what's he saying? Is he saying that Eishes Ish is a lower echelon erva in comparison to Achos Isha? Achos Isha is a higher level of erva, and therefore she patters on tzara. But Eishes Ish is a lower level of erva and doesn't patter the tzara. On the contrary, Eishes Ish is a higher level of, a more intense level of an erva. It completely undermines the entire structure of Yibum for all the brothers. Why do you assume that as far as pat up at Sarah, an Achos Isha erva would pater at Sarah, but an Eishes Isha erva would not pater up at Sarah? Is it an inferior kind of an error just because it would completely remove the whole structure of Yibum? What am I missing? Yeah, Steve?
This case, it removes altogether.
Correct.
She was
never married
married to his brother.
To any of the brothers.
Right. So she, in fact, Sarah, because there's no Sarah because she's not Isha to the brother. She disappeared.
No, but we're talking, Steve, before Yibum. After Yibum, then for sure there's no issue about the Tzara at all. There's no Yibum. I mean, that's not even a discussion on the table. If Reuven would go ahead and be miyavim, messing up the entire Isha institution, and there's no Yibum, there's no Tzara error, there's no nothing. Ein amal daber. We're talking before Reuven was miyavim. We want to know if she would knock off the Tzara, right? So Shimon, Reuven's brother, died, and he's married to Rivka as well. Would there be Yibum between Reuven and Rivka? And you're telling me, well, no, she's not similar to Tzaras Achos Ishto, because if Reuven were to implement the Yibum on this woman, not Rivka, but the, we'll call her, what name should we give her, Sarah, whatever it is, then there would be no marriage whatsoever. The marriage would be completely. So what? What does that mean? I mean, Advarim Kavachom, that only shows you, that only demonstrates how much more of an error this is. Its impact and its repercussions are even that much greater. Again, we have to keep in mind, we're talking before in an event that Reuven did not implement Yibum with this woman we'll call us Sarah. And yet, Rivka's knocked out of the ball. Why? So we don't know why. We can't derive that. It's not a fair equation to Achos Isha. In Achos Isha, and even Rivka, another wife of your late brother, is out of the ball because the Erev of Achos Isha knocks off the Tzara. In the case of this Ashes Isha, she would not knock off the Tzara. The Tzara would still fall for you because it's not similar to Achos Isha. Why? It's not similar to Achos Isha because it's a more powerful kind of impactful, Erva. I mean, if the Erva, you have an Erva with a small iron and an Erva with a big iron. So if Erva knocks off the Tzara in the case of a small iron, how much more so with a Kavachomer, it should knock off the Tzara in the case of a big iron, of a capital iron. That would be my intuitive logic.
And of course, you can never break that relationship.
So doesn't that make it a lowercase error? If he violated that erva, we'll give him whatever we'll give him. He's chayv kares, and we'll tar and feather him and publicly denounce him and so forth and so on. But it's not going to affect the entire marriage relationship for which generated evil. In that sense, it's a lower echelon erva. But imagine an erva like H's each, in a situation where it would completely undermine the entire marriage relationship. Therefore, it couldn't part to the Tzara. Therefore, that's right. What does he call lefichach? Right? Lefichach ain't a poteres as tzaras. Again, unless it's a technical thing. It's technical. Meaning, we can't derive a new category of an error because it's not simple. But it doesn't sound like he's operating in that framework. So I don't know. That's my personal issue here with this second answer to Tosa. Also, Rosh Hosif falls there. She'im tisyavim lo. Right? If let's say Reuben would go ahead and implement Yibum with this woman we called us Sarah. Nimta ki lo haisa eishes hametz. Okay, that's true. She was never married, Sarah, to Shimon, because Shimon can't be married to an Ashes Ish. But what was the name that we gave to the original God? On Ayin Vav. It's just curious. It was on Yud, right? I involved, what's his name? Yitzchak. Oh, okay. They gave him the name Yitzchak. Oh, and her name was Sarah. I think I used the name Sarah, did I not? I just want to get used to the names. I'll tell you why. It sounds like, why should I bother with that? But it'll help me down the line with all these diagrams, because I think they're being consistent with the names. Although at one point I saw they used the name Nachshon. All right, I don't know. Umimela, oh, maybe this is your logic, Steve. Umimela, lo haisa shniya tsarasa me'olam. Yeah, but I think my argument is still a good one. Anyway, nimsa she'ein hatsara tsaras eishes ish mishum tsar. Shrei calls man shelo nivala be'ilas hatnai. Calls man shelo nivala. Balas hatnai ina eishes ish. Okay, that's for sure. Liachar shetiboel barlo yiu tsaros zulazu. What is this? Technical? I don't know. Ubir b'chidushe maran riz halev. Right, so now we're on Ayin Vav. Everybody's with me? Sha'af lefi atzad hasheni shebedivrei Tosfos. I think he means the second answer, Tosfos. Shenechsheves hi lieshes ish af kodem hayibur. Ein bozeh ela kedei liftar es atzma. Sheme'achar shem tisyavim tia asur mishum eshes ish kvar me'ati nechsheves erev azulin in yibur. Aval ol al daitem b'yia b'kach af kedei liftar es sarasa. Okay, I mean, that's exactly what Tosfos is saying, that you cannot pat with sorrow. I don't know what he means. Lo ol al daitam, sheyeh b'kach af kidei, like it wasn't even a havamim or something. Shari yisod p'tur tzara eino mishum shel ha'erva potrasa el shem tzaras erva she'oser osa liyibu. Okay. I think we've had discussions about this in the past, right? Is it that the erva somehow contagiously impacts on the tzara such that she's also an erva, or no? There's a whole new category called tzaras erva, which is independent, and that generates afkas yibu. So he's going with that second approach. Because man shalo isyaben. I'm sorry. Kozman shelo is yabma balas hatanai. Adayin lo naste erva befal. Whoa. They use these philosophical terms. Lo chal b'tzarasa shem saras eshes ish. Okay, that is a beautiful chiddush. Beautiful. Like a checkmate. Hear what he's saying? He's saying, if I assume that Sarah is knocked off because she's called a Tzaras Erva, in this case, she's not a Tzaras Erva. Because right now, Tosfos says, as far as Yibum is concerned, there is no Erva of Eishes Ish. The Erva of Eishes Ish is sort of lurking in the background, ready to pounce if and when so-and-so, we'll call him Ruvain, has a bia with, what do we call her? Sarah, we called her? Umichatchila lo hikshu shetiftar at tzara mishum tzaras eishes ishal mishum tzaras eishes ak. Whoa! Now he's really going forward. Sherei me'achar balas atnai asur mishum eishu tchozer ba'af iser eishes ish ak, because there's no yibum here. Shukach tiftar tzaras al zed tirtzu sha'af mishum tzaras eishes ak ein lo lipoter. Array im tisyabim balas atnai nimtza shel hoisa eshes ach me'olam. Wow. I feel like we've reached like a pinnacle at this point, in all our learning of Masechet yevamot. This is the spitz, the high point of all the lumdus that we've had. So again, Tosfos Havamina, that in this case of a balas hatnai, the tzara would be potter from erva, is all based on the erva of Eishes Achid. It couldn't be based on the erva of Eishes Ish, because Tosfos is insisting that she's not an Eishes Ish. She'll only become an Eishes Ish if and when he has the bila. He hasn't done so yet. So to pater up the tzara, you can't pater up the tzara as a tzara's erva if there is no erva, which equals befal, of an Eishes Ish. There's a potential of being Eishes Ish. And that potential of Eishes Ish removes Yibum. You can't have a mitzvah of Yibum if the implementation of Yibum is going to undermine the entire structure of Yibum with a bias Eishes Ish. So for sure there's no Yibum. And if there's no Yibum, then we go back to the erva of Eishes Achid. And that's going to pater up the tzara. And Tosfos answers, even that could not pater up the tzara. Why? Because if there'll be Yibum, then she was never Eishes Achid. So, and that's the part that sounds very technical to me. Can you read that with me, that last line of the paragraph that starts with Bir? She'im tisyavem balas hatanai. Right, that means if Ruvain will implement the Yibum with Sarah, Nimtza shel hoisa Eishes ach me'olam. She was never married to his brother Shimon. And therefore what? So what?
Well, then Sarah would just be a normal Yibum. That's his only wife. And
Well, I don't know what you mean by a normal Yibum. There wouldn't be any Yibum at all
with the Sarah.
with anyone. I mean, again, he's retroactively blowing the whole Ichus of Shimon to this woman, we called her Sarah, from the get-go.
The other one.
Oh, yeah, the Sarah.
So she would just be a normal Yibum case.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Just 1 second. She would be a normal Yibum case. Now you of an but if Yibum take place. And so that marriage to Rivka is still a valid marriage. And that would generate a chiyuv Yibum of Ruvain to Rivka. There's a p'tur of Ervas Eishes Ach. So he's saying, no, there couldn't be a p'tur of Eishes Ach because if Ruvain would be miyavim Sarah, then Sarah was never married to his brother Shimon. So there is no Erev. But why do we add this condition of im tisyavim? Then what about right now? Now she's not an Eishes, a tzara of an Eishes Ach? Or again, he's saying it's not Dumya Achos Ishta. You understand my question? Right now, as the story unfolds, when Shimon dies, this woman is Eishes Achiv of Ruvain, and therefore Rivka could not possibly fall for Yibum to Ruvain, because she's a tzara of an Erev Eishes Ach. He says, no, she's not a tzara. Rivka is not a tzara to the Erev Eishes Ach, because if Ruvain is miyavim tzara, then Rivka is not Eishes Ach. No. That doesn't make sense. She's not a tzara to an Eishes Av. Okay, I'm sorry, I went too far. She certainly is, Rivka is certainly Eishes Av, but she's not the tzara of an Eishes Av. The Eishes Av of Yibum. So it's matter. Why? Because if the Yibum will take place, then she's not the tzara of an Eishes Av. So we need, in order to pater up a tzara, we need to say the following, that if Yibum will take place, then that woman, that Rivka, is a tzara to an Eishes Av. Or to some. But here in this case, if Yibum would take place, then she was not the tzara of an Erev. But now she's the tzara of an Erev? Why isn't it enough to say that now she's the tzara of an Erev? Right? We always keep saying that the critical moment is the Shas Nefilah. So the Shas Nefilah, when Shimon died, Rivka is the tzara of an Erev. Because what name did we give her? We called her Sarah. Because Sarah is an Eishes Av of Reuven. So why doesn't Rivka get the status of a Tzara's Erev of an Eishes Av? Again, unless he's operating with Dumya, this technical equation, it's not similar to Isha. Anything here in the footnote here? What is it, number Tess? I want to say Tosa 2. In Erev, She'eno Poter, Elim came. She'eno Poter, let's underline these words. She'eno Poter, Elim came Yishoyer Shem Erva, Gamli Achar Shetiboil. And he refers to a Ramban. I know we discussed the Ramban, but I don't remember the discussion. Again, I'm underlining these words as we close for today and for the week. She'eno poter, when is there a tour of Saras Erva? Ella im kain yishoyer shem erva gamli acher sheti boil. And I'm wondering why. Is there any lumdisha smara, or it's just a technicality because it's not similar to the other cases that are headed up by the prototype of Achos Ish? I'm going to write myself a note here. Okay, so that's where we're going to end for today. Okay, then. So let me take this opportunity to wish you all a good Shabbos and a great thank you, for the week. I think we're making some progress. I'm hoping that all this will be dividends that'll cash in as we get to the other sugyas of yevamot.